Picture the scene the way Hollywood taught you to see it. A lone rider cut against an orange 1880 sunset, hat brim low, a horse breathing steam, one hand resting near a revolver that seems to weigh nothing at all. The soundtrack swells. The border becomes a stage, the West a proving ground, and you, safe, warm, and clean, might think you could step through the screen and hold your own. But if you actually woke up out there, the first thing you'd notice wouldn't be music or glory. It would be your mouth, dry, gritty, tasting like yesterday's dust, this morning's dust, and the dust that never stops. You'd blink and feel it scrape. You'd breathe in and feel it settle. The romance disappears fast when you realize the air itself feels unwashed. Movies give you a duel. Real accounts from the frontier, letters home, trail journals, reports written by working men, keep circling back to smaller, harsher problems. Not a single clean moment of heroism, but a long, grinding routine of staying upright. You're not pacing toward a showdown. You're pacing toward whatever water you can find, hoping it doesn't make you sick. And the water is rarely what you want it to be. It isn't a crystal stream framed by wildflowers. It's a low, cold trickle in a shallow cut of earth. A muddy tank churned by hooves. A barrel sloshed for days. A tin cup passed hand to hand without anyone asking whose fingers touched it last. Because out here you don't have the luxury of being picky. You drink because you have to. Then you ride, because there's always more ground to cover. Now hold the famous image in your mind. The quick draw, the clean leather, the sharp one-liner, and place it beside the real sensation. Wet clothes that never quite dry. Boots that rub until every step becomes a decision. A body that can't decide whether it's sweating or shivering. Nights fall colder than the posters admit. Mornings arrive with stiff fingers and a saddle that feels harder every day. Even the tough talk doesn't warm you. It just burns calories you can't afford to waste. This is the part that never makes the highlight reel. The quiet bargaining you do with your own body. Just get through today. Just stay on. Just don't get weak. Because weakness on the frontier isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with a trumpet. It begins with a scratchy throat, a cough that won't quit, a stomach that turns at the wrong moment, a fever that tilts the horizon. You can't walk it off when the nearest help is a long ride away and the people beside you are fighting their own battles with hunger, weather, and exhaustion. And there's another truth the movies avoid. The border isn't one place. It's a moving line of hard living that shifts with work and season. Cattle routes, rail towns, river crossings, camps that appear and vanish. The people who passed through weren't characters in a neat story. They were workers, migrants, families, traders, soldiers, teamsters, Americans trying to earn, survive, or start over in conditions that didn't care what they wanted. So when you imagine the West, don't start with a gun. Start with a tin cup. Start with the grit between your teeth. Start with cracked hands and skin that stays dirty no matter how hard you rub it, because water is precious and time is a threat. Start with the morning you wake up already behind, already tired, already coated in the same landscape you're trying to cross. That's the real myth to break. The frontier wasn't an arena built for legends. It was a daily test that punished anyone who thought style mattered more than stamina. That's why you wouldn't last 7 days on the border. By the third day, the smell is the first thing you notice when you swing down from the saddle. It clings to your clothes and your hair, settles into the seams of your hat and the cuffs of your shirt. There's no quick fix for it, because on the trail, getting clean isn't a routine. It's an event, something that happens when you finally reach a town with a tub, or when you find a stretch of water that feels safe enough to use and you can afford the time. Most days you can't. Work comes first. Miles come first. The herd comes first. If you're riding with cattle, dust isn't just in the air. It is the air. Every hoofbeat lifts it. Every gust carries it. It rolls over you in waves and sticks to sweat the way flour sticks to wet hands. Men who lived it later said the dust coated them like a layer of fur. That wasn't poetry. It was practical. Dust packed into eyebrows, settled into the folds of ears, gathered along the neck where a bandana rubbed the skin raw. You wipe your face and your hand comes away dark. You wipe again, still dark. You could scrub until your skin burns and it wouldn't matter, because the source of the dirt never stops moving. Water is scarce, and privacy is scarcer. If there's a creek, it's needed for cooking and drinking first. If there's a stock tank, it's already cloudy from animals stepping into it. Bathing in cold water sounds simple until you try it after 10 hours in the saddle. You strip in the open, shivering in the wind, scrubbing fast before your hands go numb. Then you pull the same clothes back on, because you don't have spares, and the dirt starts all over again. Weeks can pass like that. A quick rinse when you can manage it. A rough towel if you have one. A comb if it still has teeth. A full wash with soap and thyme is rare. When a trail crew finally reaches a town, a bathhouse can mean relief or embarrassment. In some places there's a single tub, used again and again. Water is heated when possible. Soap isn't guaranteed. Cleanliness depends on money, time, and luck. Now add the dust inside your body. Every breath on a cattle drive carries grit. You inhale it. You swallow it. It scrapes your throat and dries it out. Cowboys and drovers wrote about coughing from the road, what later came to be called road cough. It wasn't mild. It was deep and harsh, often bringing up thick phlegm darkened by dust. That's not an exaggeration. It was your lungs trying to clear out what you'd been breathing all day. And it didn't stop there. Dust got into food. It settled into coffee and beans, coated the tops of biscuits. You ate it because you were hungry and there was nothing else. Even when you tried to cover your plate, the wind always found a way. You tasted the trail in every meal. Hygiene wasn't just about comfort. It shaped health. Dirty hands and shared cups mattered more when clean water was limited, and people lived close together. Small cuts on knuckles and wrists could inflame when they stayed dirty. Skin under damp clothes broke down. Saddle sores turned serious because you rode day after day with no chance to rest or clean properly. Lice and fleas were common in crowded camps and bunkhouses. Bedrolls were rolled, unrolled, borrowed, traded, and laid on the same ground night after night. Even your teeth suffered. There were no easy fixes out there. Tooth pain was something you worked through. Swollen gums meant rinsing your mouth with whatever you had and hoping it passed. A small problem could turn into weeks of misery because there was no clean clinic down the road and no medicine waiting in your saddlebag. This is where the movie version falls apart. The West didn't break people only in dramatic moments. It wore them down. It turned the body into a target for small, relentless things. Dirt, sweat, cold water, shared gear, and days without a real wash. People like to say the frontier was dangerous because of gunfights. For many working men, the real danger was slower and quieter. Filth, exposure, and the steady damage of living dirty because there was no other choice. Hunger out there doesn't sound like a growling stomach the way it does in the movies. It sounds like a pot lid rattling in the wind and a cook telling you, again, that tonight is beans. You watch the fire. You watch the same tin plates make their rounds. And you begin to understand that the West wasn't built on thick steaks and fresh bread. Most working people on the move lived on what could travel, what wouldn't spoil quickly, and what could be cooked in a single pot. Beans, bacon or salt pork, coffee, hard biscuits, they appear again and again. When there was fresh meat, it was either tough or scarce, depending on the job and the season. People ate what they could carry, not what they wanted. After a few weeks, the problem isn't just boredom, it's what your body starts to miss. Fresh vegetables and fruit were hard to keep on a long trail, and without them, some people developed scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. It showed up as weakness, aching joints, gums that grew tender and swollen. Teeth could loosen. Simple tasks felt heavier. You could still ride and work, but it felt like your strength was leaking away a little more each day. There was no easy fix when supplies were far off, and the nearest town might still be days away. Food could also turn dangerous in quieter ways. Bacon went rancid. Flour grew stale or buggy. Meat spoiled if it wasn't salted well enough or if the weather turned warm. Even when food looked fine, dirty hands and shared utensils could pass stomach illness through a camp. There were no coolers, sealed containers, or clean kitchens, only dust, flies, and whatever water you could find. And then there was the real threat: drinking water. On paper, it sounds simple. Find a creek, fill a canteen, move on. In reality, frontier water was often a gamble. A stream could look clear and still be unsafe if animals had been in it upstream. Springs drew cattle. Ponds and water holes were churned into mud by hooves. In towns, wells sometimes sat too close to waste pits because planning was rough and space was tight. People didn't understand germs the way we do now, but they noticed patterns. Some places made people sick. Some water just didn't sit right. Boiling helped, but boiling took time and fuel. Out on the open range, wood was scarce. On the plains, people burned dried brush or buffalo chips, and that wasn't always enough for regular boiling. Sometimes you were too thirsty to wait. Sometimes you told yourself it would be fine, because it had to be. This is where the story shifts, because it stops being only about hardship and becomes about choice. I remember coming upon a small seep of water at the base of a low hill one evening. It wasn't much, but it was cold and clearer than what we'd been using. My first thought was home, real water from a pump, my mother handing me a cup without warning me to sip slowly, fresh fruit on a summer table, a kitchen that smelled like soap instead of dust. For a moment, I was sure this seep was a gift, as if the land had finally decided to give us a break. Then I saw the hoofprints, fresh, and the smear of mud where animals had stood. The water might have started clean, but it hadn't stayed that way. I had a match and a small pot. I could boil a little, not enough for everyone, not without stopping longer than we could afford. The men were tired. We still had miles ahead, and one of the younger hands, barely more than a kid, had been holding his stomach all afternoon, pale and quiet, trying not to slow us down. He wasn't asking for help. He was trying to be tough, because that's what the West demanded. I had to decide what to do with the cleanest water I could make. I boiled what I could and gave it to him first. Not because I was brave, but because I knew what it felt like to be far from home and realize your body was failing you in a place that didn't care. He drank slowly, eyes down, almost ashamed to need anything. The rest of us drank from the seep anyway, took our chances, told ourselves we'd been fine before. Sometimes people were fine. Sometimes they weren't. Dysentery was common in the 1800s and spread easily through unsafe water and poor sanitation, bringing severe diarrhea and weakness. Typhoid fever moved the same way, through contaminated food and water. Cholera outbreaks swept through parts of the United States in the 19th century too, and when it reached a place with unsafe water, it moved fast. Out on the trail, sickness meant lost strength, lost time, and the fear that help might run out before you reached it. That's the slow damage the movies never show. Months of the same food, days of water you don't trust, and a body breaking down from the inside while you keep riding, because stopping feels even more dangerous than moving. The first real storm doesn't ask if you're ready. One day, you're riding under a hard blue sky. The next, the wind shifts, and the temperature drops so fast, it feels like someone flung open the door of a freezer. You pull your coat tighter, but it barely helps. Out on the open range, the weather reaches you anyway. It slips into your sleeves, under your collar, through your gloves, down into the saddle leather. The cold isn't just around you. After a while, it feels like it's inside your bones. This is the West the posters don't sell. People like to imagine bright sun, long horizons, and a dry heat that makes everything look clean. But the frontier ran through places where winter could turn an ordinary workday into a fight, just to stay warm, stay oriented, and stay moving. Nature wasn't background scenery. It was the dominant force in the story, and it didn't care what you believed about yourself. On the northern plains, the winter of 1886 to 1887 became one of the clearest examples of how fast things could unravel. Ranchers and riders were already stretched thin. Herds were large. The open range system depended on grass, distance, and timing. Then the weather came down hard. Accounts from the time describe early heavy snow followed by brutal cold. Blizzards erased visibility. You couldn't see the next fence post, let alone the next rider. When snow crusted over and stayed, cattle couldn't reach grass. When the wind kept driving it into drifts, feed vanished. The herds moved to survive, and that movement only made things worse, pushing animals until they were too exhausted to go on. Later, many people called it the Great Die-Up, because of the scale of the losses across parts of Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. The exact numbers vary, but the conclusion doesn't. Ranches lost enormous portions of their herds. Some companies collapsed. Smaller operators were wiped out entirely. The winter didn't just sour morale. It reshaped the business itself. On the ground, it looked nothing like a classic Western scene. You didn't stand tall in a warm sunset. You leaned into the wind. You worked to keep your horse pointed the right way. You searched for a cut bank, a line of trees, anything that might break the gusts. And you faced choices that felt anything but heroic. Do you push forward and risk getting lost? Or stop and risk letting the cold settle into you? Do you go after missing cattle? Or stay with the men you still have? Because losing people would cost more than losing stock? If you've never been in a true whiteout, it's hard to grasp how quickly it steals direction. Sky and ground blur into one. Landmarks vanish, sound dulls, the wind takes over. A rider can travel in a wide circle and never realize it. Even the short distance between camp and creek can turn dangerous when visibility drops and the cold tightens its grip. From those conditions came the stories. Some from newspapers, some from ranch records, others from memories shared years later. Cattle found clustered behind small rises, frozen where they stood because there was nowhere else to go. Riders who left camp for a quick task and never made it back before the storm closed in. And yes, men found still in the saddle, having tried to push through until their bodies finally gave out. In weather like that, the line between tough and reckless is razor thin. The myth says the West was sunny, open, and simple. Strong people, simple rules, clean victories. The reality is colder, messier, and often decided by the sky. Winter didn't care if you were skilled. It didn't care if you were brave. It didn't care if you had a plan. One storm could erase a season of work. One week of extreme cold could empty a range that looked full just months earlier. So when someone says the frontier was mostly about gunfights and swagger, remember this. For many who lived it, the greatest threat wasn't another person at all. It was the weather, quiet at first, then overwhelming, turning the wide-open West into a place where making it to morning became the only goal. When you strip away the movie shine, the Wild West starts to look less like a stage and more like a hard test that ran every hour of the day. It wasn't a place built for legends. It was a place that demanded constant effort just to stay functional. If you came west expecting a clean story, clear heroes, clear villains, one decisive moment that settled everything, you would have been disappointed. Most people didn't meet the frontier in a single dramatic scene. They met it in the small, grinding details of everyday life. Again and again, the same pattern appears in letters, diaries, and reports from the late 1800s. Discomfort first, then fatigue, then illness, then bad luck made worse by distance. Dirt wasn't just unpleasant. It was everywhere, worked into skin, clothing, food, and lungs. On cattle drives, dust could hang over a herd for miles. People wrote about how it coated them, how coughing became part of the job. Washing depended on time, weather, and water quality. A truly clean day could be rare enough to feel like a holiday. Then there was food and water. The popular image is a campfire, fresh meat, coffee that tastes like victory. The usual reality was plainer and rougher. Beans, bacon or salt pork, hard bread, coffee strong enough to cut through exhaustion. Fresh produce was hard to keep while moving, and that mattered. Without it, some people developed scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, bringing weakness, joint pain, and swollen gums. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And the biggest daily gamble wasn't always a person with a gun. It was a cup of water. Streams and springs could be contaminated by animals upstream. Wells in fast-growing towns were often poorly placed. Boiling helped, but time and fuel weren't always available. Diseases like dysentery and typhoid spread through unsafe water and poor sanitation in the 1800s, and cholera outbreaks struck parts of the United States as well. On the frontier, sickness could turn serious quickly. When help was days away, and real rest even farther, a simple stomach illness could become a genuine threat. Then nature stepped in and reminded everyone who was in charge. The winter of 1886 to 1887 on the northern plains is still remembered because it struck systems that were already stretched thin. Heavy snow, brutal cold, and storms that made travel dangerous led to massive cattle losses and forced the industry to change. Ranching shifted away from open range toward fencing, stored feed, and winter planning. That winter didn't just damage herds and profits. It revealed how narrow the margin of survival could be when the weather turned against you. Put it all together, and the conclusion is hard to avoid. The Wild West wasn't an arena designed for heroes. It was a survival test. Dirt, disease, and weather broke people faster than any showdown. The most common dangers didn't need a soundtrack. They were quiet, constant, and unforgiving. So here's the real question. If you had ended up there, without modern medicine, clean running water, grocery stores, warm cars, or phones, what would you have been? The myth says you would have become a legend. Most people didn't. They became workers whose names never made it into a story. A line in a ranch ledger, a note in a family Bible, a grave marker with a date and little else. The frontier didn't hand out fame. It handed out lessons and charged a heavy price for each one. And maybe that's the point worth remembering. The West wasn't better because it was harder. It was harder because life there was fragile, and every day demanded choices. What to eat, what to drink, when to rest, when to push on, who to help first, and which risks to accept when there were no safe options. If this version of the frontier surprised you, don't let it fade when the video ends. Share it with someone who still sees the Wild West as a clean myth. And if you want more stories that separate the famous image from the real history, told plainly with the human cost left in, stay with me, subscribe, and the next time someone says, they were built different back then, you'll know what that really means.